Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Tuesday evening Ask the Doc call. My name is Lynn Matthews, and it is always such a pleasure being here sharing this information with you. And we're going to be discussing a revolutionary way of approaching health and vitality this evening. For most of the last century, we've looked at health and approached it by looking at the symptoms, right? Doing things that would mitigate the symptoms, which is helpful, but it never gets to the root of the problem. And redox is changing all of that. So if redox is a new term for you, you are in great company. It was for all of us on this call, even the friend that invited you, until somebody had the courage to invite them to learn about it. Redox, think you can think about it, it's the energy that powers all life. Nothing happens in your body, my body, even our pets' bodies without a redox reaction. They're an amazing communication system that not only protects your body's healthy cells, but helps the body find, detect, repair, and replace any cells that are damaged anywhere in your body. So tonight we're going to learn not only, what is redox and why is it so profound, but why should you care? What might it mean in your life and on your journey for health and vitality? People look at this for a lot of reasons, and you might find several reasons in here that intrigue you. The most important reason people look at this is because they have a health challenge, or maybe it's a loved one, a friend, a family member who has a health challenge, and they're trying to learn about this to see if, maybe it's the missing link to help them get back into that healthy status again. Some people look at this because they want to be proactive with their health. They don't want things that are lurking beneath the surface to ever be able to become anything that could be problematic. And so they're looking to, start now and maintain that vitality going forward. And then there's others who are looking at this because they've heard there's some kind of athletic benefit, and whether you're a pickleball player, tennis player, maybe you like to bike or hike. You don't have to be a professional athlete. You don't have to be an Olympic athlete to get the benefits that any athlete can get. And that's things like more mental clarity, faster recovery, more endurance. And even though, yes, there are people at that level using this, all of us could use that in our lives, even if it's just wanting more energy at the end of the day to do the things we love or to do things with our kids and grandkids. So we're going to talk a little bit about that athletic benefit as well. And then another reason people look at this is for the anti-aging benefits. We're all 24 hours older now than we were at this time yesterday. But what if there was a way to turn back the clock and not just in what we see in the mirror, the outward visible signs of living longer on this planet, but the insides as well. Dr. Hoffman always reminds us that the wrinkles that we see on the outside are simply a reflection of the wrinkles and the oxidative stress that are happening internally on our cells, our organs, et cetera. So what if we could turn back the clock and interrupt the breakdown of aging? And finally, people look at this because when you have a discovery, a breakthrough of this magnitude that literally impacts every human being on the planet, there is an opportunity. There's an opportunity to really make a difference in this world. And if that's something that intrigues you, if that's something that resonates with you, whether it's now or after you've seen and learned how truly profound this is, get back to the person that invited you and they can tell you a little bit more about what it's like to be part of this amazing community of people changing lives around the world. We don't have a lot of time to get into that on Tuesday nights, but we do get into it on Saturday mornings when Dr. Hoffman's colleague, Dr. David Silverman, hosts on the same Zoom, same password at 10:30 East Coast time, another Ask the Doc call. He doesn't do a full presentation like you're going to hear tonight. That first half hour, he'll answer questions and he'll go over, best practices, how to get the most from these redox molecules. And then at the top of the hour, we switch over and talk about, what is it like to be part of this team, bringing this to people and helping people get educated about it. So again, if that's something that intrigues you or resonates with you, please join us on Saturday and ask the friend who invited you to tell you a little bit more. But right now, I would like to introduce you to a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Carolyn Hoffman. She is a board certified traditional naturopath. She's been doing that for over 23 years. She is also on the medical professional board for this company, which is a volunteer position. But what I love about that, and she's been on it for a number of years, she not only brings to these calls her vast background in health and wellness, but also she's had the chance over the years to kind of pull back the curtain and understand a lot more about not only redox molecules themselves, but also these specific products and how profound they are and what we're seeing in the world of research and reality, so to speak, with these molecules. So it is an Ask the Doc call. So if you have any questions while she's going through her presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will go back and answer your questions, but just, we always have to say, and you'll learn why, but this company chose not to be a drug and to go down the drug path. Because of that decision, we cannot make any claims that this cures, prevents, heals anything, and we cannot address directly condition names, disease names. So when you're putting your questions in, think more about wording them with the symptoms that you're experiencing so that we can better answer your questions. And I think that's it. Caroline, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you.
Super, Lynn. We're going to have to flex this evening because I've already said to you I've had trouble with my Canva and it's gone back into deciding not to load again at all. So let's kind of just, I'll see, it might take about another 5 minutes like last time. So let's talk it through a little bit and I'll see if we can kind of navigate through. If it comes back, if my slides come back, I'll pop them up. And thank you always. We always love the fact that people are willing to spend the time with us because I know that I always think as a practitioner that this really truly has proven to be the single most influential product technology that I've had the privilege of using. And we want to speak to why that is. And it's because basically it's all about something entirely different. I'm sure like Lynn and myself and everybody else that's probably come to this, even if you've never heard of Redox before, you've probably been in the space where you've been dealing with nutrients, physical supplements that we would consume in capsules or pills, etc., that the body has to break down and then digest and try and get those nutrients out to the cells. And so we're always kind of thinking, aren't we, Lynn, like, I know you came to the redox piece because you had some challenges with joint issues, and very often people are taking supplements that address those joint issues, or they might be addressing a cardiovascular issue or a memory issue and very specific. Redox is different. I think of this as the Wi-Fi system for the human body. And basically, as we all speak, we are all making redox signaling molecules, right? But what happens is that we're actually making fewer of them, and it starts pretty early on in puberty. So not where we think of aging by any means. But it's actually, the clock is already ticking. And I'll speak to things that people are popping up in those chat boxes as we get to the end of it, most definitely. So what is a redox signaling molecule? Well, it's something that's actually been studied since the 90s, and then we have 6 Nobel Prizes in this field. And if you look at medicine, it's driving the whole direction for health science as a whole. And why is that? Because I mentioned that I think of it as the Wi-Fi system. Deep in every single cell, these 70 to 100 trillion cells that we have these little engines that are generating the energy of ATP, the mitochondria. And in that process, they produce these 2 signaling messengers, which science has kind of taken 2 different words which represent those signals. One is a reductant, one is an oxidant. And in science, they've kind of combined that, and we know the term redox biology in medicine. But what is it? It's like the language, right, Lynn? Like how we are actually able to communicate. We all speak in English on this. Somebody else might speak in a different language. But the fact is, if we don't speak accurately, communication gets pretty messy. We don't get good outcome. And it's the same deal within the body. These signaling messengers are the way in which every cell communicates within itself and across the whole of the body, in those 70 to 100 trillion cells that make up the human body. And they make sure, as Lynn beautifully explained at the beginning, the role of a redox molecule is to solve problems, to find damaged cells and make decisions about, do they need to be eliminated and replaced with new ones? We might think of that as healing. Do they need to be repaired? We often will see that, how often we have deep cuts and we might cut ourselves and everything gets very red around the outside. That's the oxidant part of a redox molecule, and it's the 911 system. It's actually calling the body to create healing, and that's the reductant. So that's like the fire and rescue turn up. So we have these two things, right? One is, let's signal and tell the body where the problem is, and then allow the healing mechanism to come and find it and solve the problem. Redox does a few other really important things. It maintains genetic expression. Now, that's pretty important because that's the way the body designs and looks at the blueprint, the DNA of each human being, and then builds out that blueprint to be accurate. Now, if anyone's built a house, you want an accurate blueprint outcome, right? You don't want a wonky house and bad outcomes, and that's really what your genetic expression is. And we'll talk a bit more about the importance of that in redox. It also maintains the way that the body's able to be stress resilient, and that's really the key to health. I was actually on a call only earlier today, and another doctor was talking about that health is really how well a body can flex and restore balance again. And that's really what redox is all about. It's allowing the cells to flex when we're under duress from emotional stress or physical stress through physical trauma, for example, environmental toxins, which we're all deluged with nowadays, pesticides, fungicides, all of those things that are going into life, and disease cells. All of those things cause stress, and we want a body that can say, we've recognized there's a problem and we're going to solve that problem. So let's talk a little bit. Lynn, maybe we'll kind of blend in here because we kind of leave this a little bit to what is the ethos of this company. But why don't you kind of share that we have this visionary, Verdis Norton, who intersected with this publicly traded company who was doing research into these exact same molecules, right? And they were on the market. They were doing all this for 10 years, trying to look at how do we make a drug out of it. Tricky little molecules because they want to go to work in nanoseconds, and they could produce them in these little machines and you could drink them and you got a benefit from them, but they would only last for about 10 minutes. So there's nothing usable in terms of a commercial thing. And everybody said, nah, you can't stabilize something that volatile outside the human body in any usable form, right? And along comes Verdis. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? We'll kind of flip with the way that we do things tonight.
Okay. Yeah, so Verdis had been asked to come and do some consulting for this company. And while he was doing that, they let him try this liquid that they really didn't realize what it was, and it wasn't stabilized. And he realized very early on that they had something quite special there, but they couldn't get it. And he was brought in to get an influx of capital and they couldn't get it. So they started selling off their assets. And he bought the technology and he put together a team of scientists of his own. They've recognized it was redox molecules. They stabilized it so that it had a shelf life so that it could be turned into something that could be given out to the public. Like Dr. Hoffman said, originally, these are very volatile. So in the lab, they were only viable for 10, 15 minutes, and they knew they couldn't do anything with that. So for him, a little background on Verdis Norton, he was quite a visionary, as Dr. Hoffman said. He was a strategist. He was the vice president of international strategy for Kraft Foods, a $33 billion company. So he had brought a lot of iconic products to market. And for him, he had retired, and this was a business play for him. He had acquired this technology. He was just going to turn around and sell it. And he thought selling it to a pharmaceutical company would be the best thing to do. So he started talking to some colleagues and got them very interested. This one company sent their top scientists out. And while he was doing all of this, he had a focus group of about 40 people with varying levels of health challenges. These were friends, family members, church members who had something going on, and they had full access to this liquid. They could get as much as they wanted. 6 of these people were in, very, very serious health condition. They had been given a time frame and told to get their affairs in order. And at the end of a couple months, everybody who had given this product to they seem to be doing better, and these 6 people seem to be thriving. And so, as he's talking to this pharmaceutical company and all of their top scientists, they told him, look, you've got something pretty special here. We want it. But there's one little caveat in this contract with you, and that is that everybody you have on it, they're going to need to come off it. It's not going to be available to them. And when he realized that people were not going to be able to have access to this, especially those 6 people, he said to them, I can't do that. And they said, look, if you want that check, which was tens and tens of millions of dollars, they said, you have to walk away. And honestly, I don't know what any of us on this call would do given that situation with that kind of money on the line. But that is the beginning of the ethos of this company. He said, I can't morally or ethically do that to those people, especially those 6 people. And so he walked away. And at the age of 69, he started this company called ASEA. And he wanted to make sure that this was his legacy to humanity, because he understood at a very fundamental level that this was changing people's lives. It was giving them their lives back. It was creating more vitality. And he was looking for a way to bring this to market, because I don't know that we've gotten into that yet. But if you look at the bottle, we're all trained to look at ingredients, right? And if you look at the bottle, it just says sodium chloride and water. That's salt water. And so most people, if that was on a shelf in a health food store or Whole Foods or someplace, and you look at the bottle, you're thinking, why would I buy salt water when I can go mix it up in my kitchen? And even though it says it's Redox certified and it's guaranteeing what's in those Redox molecules, most of us don't know what Redox is yet. I think that's coming. And so he realized very early on that this was not something that could be just stuck on a store shelf. It required an explanation. It required something like this Ask the Doc call, where people who have experienced it and are excited to share this with people they care about can bring them somewhere where they can get educated and figure out if this resonates with them. And so he chose word of mouth marketing, network marketing. And he knew at the time, because he was a big corporate guy, right? Kraft Foods, Fortune 50 company. He knew that this industry did not have a stellar reputation. And he really wanted to make sure that ASEA stood apart and that it was more like a next level marketing company where things like people and principles and purpose were given more, should I say, were more important than profits and egos. And so he started this company at the age of 69 with that in mind. And here we are 15, 16 years later. And that ethos runs so deep through this company. That's honestly, and I know Dr. Hoffman feels the same way, that is why we are both still here doing this, because this company really is about people. It's not about making a simple transaction, getting somebody to go buy some ASEA and some Redox. It's about creating a relationship with someone, finding out what they need, and will this fit with them? Can this help them? Can this serve them? And to me, that is just as important as these truly groundbreaking technologies and products that I would never stop using. But the reason I'm here sharing every Tuesday night and still sharing this with people around the world is because this company definitely has a soul and a heart at a time when corporate greed is so rampant and it's all about profits and the bottom line, and people be damned, pardon my language. But that seems to be, a lot of corporate thought. And it's really refreshing to know that this company truly does care. And they invest a lot of money in research and development, universities around the world. And maybe, I don't know if your Canva presentation is ready, but maybe talk a little bit about, some of the research that has been done. And even now, all around the world, people are now coming to us wanting to partner with ASEA to do research, which was not how it was 12 years ago, right? No one had heard of this.
No, and he had the foresight to say, you know what, let the science catch up with us. He realized it was too important. I wish my Canva thing would actually load and catch up with this, but no, it's not, and I haven't got anything saved that's this recent, so I can't use anything at all. But let's kind of talk about the science, because we've had to invest, because we are the first and only company who has managed to stabilize these molecules, which are in our famous blue bottle. So this is the stabilized redox liquid, and on the back of it is a specifically important study, a genetic study that was done in 2017. I always find it interesting. I started using this product in 2017, and then about 4 to 5 months later, I now had the proof of why I was seeing all these amazing changes for my clients. My specialty is digestive health. If anybody knows me, you'll know that that's one of the things that I do. And so as I started to introduce this to my clients, what I saw was literally to a T, every single one of them had better digestive health function. They needed fewer supplements that they were physically consuming, and they had much better health outcome. And then along comes this study. So in 2017, we invested in getting Tora Labs, who's an independent genetic specialists, and they ran an 8-week double-blind placebo-controlled study. So they took healthy, and I always think this is kind of funny, healthy 35-year-olds, right? At 35, we kind of don't think that we're over the hill already, but actually metabolically, we're really at that point when everything is really sliding downhill from there on. Not that you really notice it until a little longer, but they tested their genetic expression, and all of the genetic expression for those healthy 35-year-olds had already started down regulating. So it's a real, I think it's a really important point to realize, like you said, you know, Lynn, about, to me, prevention is where the most important, most powerful place can be. And like my kids in their mid to late 20s and early 30s have started this now for the last 7 years, and they're already noticing that they're just peaking the 30 point, you know, they're already noticing that they're much more stress resilient than their friends are who don't do this. So, you know, the sooner we can get into that space, the less chance we have of down regulating and on seeing all those things that go with aging, because we are increasing our oxidation and not responding, and therefore not healing it in the way that we do when we're younger. But this genetic study, so they put the main group testing with ASEA, they put them on 8 ounces of the Redox for the 8 weeks. They had the placebo group on plain saline, exactly the same saline we start with before it goes through its transformation. And this is not a material. So even though we're in the space of the FDA and we have to comply with those ingredients on the back of the bottle, we start with saline, but it's a transformation, a chemical transformation with electrolysis, pH, temperature, all sorts of things that go into breaking the bonds of that salt and water in exactly the same way that our mitochondria and our cells are doing in order to replicate and make the same redox molecules. So they put them on the saline, the plain placebo group are on the saline, and then of course you have a control group in a double-blind placebo study. What was fascinating was at the end of the 8 weeks, they tested their genetic function. Everyone who was drinking the Redox, 100% of those people had a 20 to 31% sustained and beneficial improvement in genetic function. 100%. So if you're wondering if this could do anything for you, unless you're not part of the human race, it absolutely is going to work the same way for you. Now, the placebo group is always there in science because, you know, we have this thing as humans, if we have a capacity to think that whatever we're taking might have a benefit, there's this little shift that happens in the body, and that's why they always have this placebo group. Well, here we had a 0% change in genetic function. So the genes weren't tricked by the mind whatsoever to think that there's something that they should respond to. But those two statistics are completely unusual in double-blind science. So here's what shifted, or here's what we reported, because I do know that, in fact, all the genetic pathways had this beneficial response, but we chose to only talk about 5 gene pathways that are fully mapped. And those are immune signaling system, inflammatory signaling system, cardiovascular health with vein elasticity, hormone signaling with vitality and wellness as a whole, and then bingo, my area, digestive enzyme production, plus the other side of it, it actually inhibited this challenge that we have with nutrient absorption. So for those of you who are taking supplements, what that's going to say to you is that whatever you're currently taking, just like my clients, you'll see that it facilitates the body to actually open up cell membranes and absorb those nutrients much better. So you're going to nourish your body to have a better outcome both ways round. So it's really kind of cool. And in my experience, people don't need as many supplements. And the ones that you're taking, you can actually drop the quantities that you're taking because more of it's getting into the cells. Do you understand that just because we consume things like this, it does not mean that it actually gets to the cell? There's a big gap between that within the, especially once you're 27 and over, because the pH changes in the stomach. So this was a really significant study, right? 100% got benefit, 0 on placebo. You speak to all the other things, right, Lynn? You mentioned that we put a huge amount of money, and we've had to because we're first to market. We're still the only people in this space. Nobody can actually pour out what we have in here because it's not ingredients and say, oh, we can reverse engineer it. So we have 7 patents, 1,000 trade secrets, and we have one facility in Utah that protects all of that knowledge and that special science and makes the world's supply of redox molecules. And from there, without any third party involvement, we ship directly to the doorstep of every consumer in 37 countries in the world. And plus, we fully guarantee our product. So we have here, we've been in this space for 15 years, right? Bio-replenishing people. Do you want to comment on something, Lynn, there?
I was just going to say, we talked about this, and some of that research was about the safety and how is this so different than everything out there? We even think tap water can be safe and herbs sometimes, but can you address the safety of this technology?
Pretty good point. I mean, they started looking at this, and one of the things they found was that it actually, the redox as a whole naturally is an antibacterial. So it is what helps us combat bacteria within the body. So they were using it for things like sterilization in OR rooms. This is where the whole research came. But in that, you were talking about, going to the FDA route. And if people don't understand research towards going FDA in a drug, well, the first thing that you have to do with whatever you're testing is you have to establish what we call an LD50, in other words, a lethal dose 50. So in other words, those poor animals that they use get fed whatever substance the company is trying to take to market. And once they've sufficiently killed off 50% of them with whatever quantity achieves that, that establishes an LD50. Now, every drug that we consume has an LD50 because every drug has toxicity to it. Well, the tricky part about why we never got to that space either is because there is no toxicity to this product. So currently, if someone is incredibly deficient in their production of redox and overwhelmingly struggling with chronic health issues that may be very debilitating, maybe life-threatening, like those people in the first beta test, people will drink as much of this as a bottle a day because it is totally non-toxic. Now, well, hopefully you're not going to need that, and most of us certainly don't need that. Most of us are trying to combat the natural loss, which is, as I said, happening in puberty at 1% per year. We start to lose these signals. So every decade, we're down another 10%. Plus, what we carry forward over time becomes less efficient. So this is our way of kind of interrupting when we're drinking this. We're interrupting that loss. And actually, we'll show, I can't show the photos. Maybe you've got some photos you can pop up of Rosie, who literally is walking her life backwards from 84 to 91, and she looks at least 10 years younger because you're interrupting the breakdown of aging. So totally non-toxic. We can't be allergic to it because we're only alive for about 3 seconds if we stop making it. In other words, we're all making it at the moment. We're just not making as much as we used to when we were younger. And I think probably for me as a practitioner, I love all of these things. This is my space since the 80s, is nutrition. But no matter how brilliant the product is, no matter how pure it is, herbs have the potential, because they're powerful, to interact with medications. And in the last 15 years, I would say 10 to 15 years, doctors are now beginning to get savvy to the fact that we're taking a lot of supplements. And now you're going to have to list all the things that you take if you go in for an operation, because they want to make sure that they're not going to interfere with things. This is 100% safe. It is transparent to medication, which means that if you're on meds this evening and you're kind of considering whether this might be a space for you, it's beautiful because we don't want you to change anything. We want you to stay exactly as you are. We want you to benchmark everything about your health, and the person that invited you can help you go through a very comprehensive tracking process. So we benchmark where we begin, we add this in, and then we track the changes. This is what we call broad spectrum. So if we think of the fact that we are 70 to 100 trillion cells that make up the human body, this is going to activate and strengthen the communication in every single cell. Now, I mentioned the inflammatory gene signaling pathway. Now, this is an interesting one. So 2017, we see that, we activate this, and genes are like a doorway into multiple cascading pathways all over the body, passing signals and making things happen. And number 4 in that inflammatory signaling pathway is something called the NRF2. That is the pathway that the body is built with to combat inflammation. And it does that by creating glutathione, which is our master antioxidant, much more powerful than any physical antioxidant we can consume, plus things like superoxide dismutase and catalase. But science is well documented. We can't live without glutathione, right? Because that is our response to oxidation. And the older we are, the less we have. The older and sicker we are, the less we have. So if you're old and you're sick and you're in hospital, science has well documented that those people are right at the bottom of the pile for the amount of glutathione that they're producing, which is why it's so important. So our early studies showed that when we consume this, we actually make our own production of glutathione 800% more effective. That's a pretty powerful statement, but that was one of our earlier studies. Our most recent ones in the last 3 years of research in Western Australia and Bath University in England show that we raise the production by 70% as well. That's massive, right? They're a much more powerful way to actually increase your production of glutathione than taking physical glutathione supplements. Glutathione is a very big molecule. It doesn't cross the cell membrane easily. So when you're consuming those physical versions, there's not a lot that actually gets out to the cell in that way. But our scientists in Western Australia did some interesting studies. They started playing around with our technology and they saw some really unique things. They ran some studies and they saw something not heard of in science, right? 3 identical sets of results. And so they said, we must have done something wrong here because that's not possible. Then they went back and they actually said, let's run them again. And they got exactly the same results again. Again, it's 6 for 6. This just doesn't happen. And then they passed it out to their colleagues and said, can you run these same studies? Because we must be doing something wrong. And they got the same results from a different set of scientists. So they came back to us and said, do you realize that when we do these things that your product actually does X? And what was X? X was by tweaking the way that we use the species of redox in here, because this is broad spectrum, we can now kind of laser light the focus of that redox reaction. And we can actually think of just activating that inflammatory signaling pathway. Now, you don't have to be a scientist probably to know that, science has well shown that disease causes inflammation and inflammation causes disease. And I think many years ago, Time magazine did an article on that whole thing, right? Because what is it? It is fire, it is heat, it is stuff that damages cells. So we want to control that. A little bit of fire is nice when it's warm, but it's not good when it burns your house down. And the body's exactly the same. It's a signal to get the body to repair when it's just under control. But when that response and repair doesn't happen and it gets out of control, we see lots of things go wrong. And so what we did was let's kind of backtrack for a second. So we spent 5 years with people spraying this on their body. and getting benefit, right, for all sorts of things, but that gets kind of messy. So they said, well, how can we have a topical? And we have something called Renew 28, which is our topical. This was a 5-year project in itself. Why? Because we mentioned these molecules need to go to work. They need to give away their energy and direct where they're needed, because that's what an electron transfer chain does. It wants to rest. It wants to give its energy away and make it work and then rest and repeat that process. And so it was hard to find something that wouldn't activate those molecules before we could use them. Well, they found something called a silica clay, which is completely transparent. You'll kind of see that there's no color to it whatsoever. We've been using this now since 2014. And why is it called Renew 28? Because when you put it on your skin, it is activating what I think of as reverse aging. It is activating the skin cell turnover faster by 16% in 28 days. And we get all these other wonderful benefits of 20 to 23% fine lines and wrinkles and skin tone and texture. So if you want to look younger, this is the way to go, right? All over. And until this year, we've used it in a concentrated way by applying it more frequently on areas that hurt to actually shift, because it will target that inflammatory pathway, how to help the body address something that's uncomfortable, something that's causing discomfort, maybe range of motion, any of those things. And now our science went one step further with this last 3 years, and they said, you know what, we can activate just that inflammatory signaling pathway, and we've come up with something called Redox Gold. This is activated through 24-karat molecular gold. You probably won't see it on the screen, but when you get it into the light, you can actually see flecks of gold in there. And that's what actually helps this different species or ratio of redox activate and target, like laser therapy. And this one we rub in far more. We want to activate by actually rubbing it in. You can see it's completely clear, and it's already going to be helping. Now, a lot of us think of this as very rapid relief, because this particular thing does two things. It gives rapid support to combat and help the body focus on combating that inflammatory response wherever you're putting it. But it also does more than that. It helps to activate the underlying recovery pathway for the body. So what we're seeing is two things. But we know that we see some freaky fast results a lot of the time. And we do encourage people to put this on and then take a look at your watch, and having benchmark where you started, pay attention and see what can change. Now, if you're one of those where you need to, the response is a little slower, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, you're not actually seeing anything, we say apply it one more time, because sometimes your inflammatory response is much deeper and it needs more to get that going and to support it. So let's think about that. We have other products that support this, but these are our pure redox technology. So these are all exactly the same molecules as are going on inside the body. Where do we want to go next, Lynn, with our conversation?
Do you want to talk a little bit about, like, not just expectations, because we are working at the molecular level, and oftentimes, we're so used to Western medicine where you take something and you see something happen, even though it might not be resolving the root cause. Just kind of some clear expectations, and then how we start people out, and maybe even the health assessment form that we use and why it's important.
Yeah, great point. So how would you begin this? Well, traditionally we say for most people, I'll go over a couple of exceptions, we would begin by taking 4 ounces a day. So maybe 2 in the morning, 2 in the evening. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we want you to benchmark everything about your health. Now, you might have a joint issue. Maybe, you've got creaky knees. Maybe you've got a breathing issue. Maybe it's a hormonal thing. Maybe you've had this for not just a week or a month, but 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. So we want to set reasonable expectation, because if you have a drug, understand allopathic means against nature. A drug is chemical and it's very specific in how it pushes and forces the body into a space. It doesn't mean, as Lynn mentioned, that it's doing anything to do with healing or wellness. It's just combating the symptom that's causing some problems. So the body's smart because it pushes back against that. And very often you'll probably hear your friends or your family or whatever say, well, my doctor increased the quantity because it wasn't responding anymore to it, or they now gave me another drug and this is the way we go. When we're working in the holistic space, in other words, a non-drug space, and it's not just about Redox, it doesn't matter what you're using, you are providing this network support for the body's ability to heal. The body is designed to heal. It does know it has that innate intelligence, otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? But it gets put out of balance and we've got to help support it find its way back there, and that's what you're doing with the Redox. So we always say, start with 4 ounces, benchmark when you begin, and at the end of the week, re-benchmark and see what has your body done with it. I mentioned this is broad spectrum, so in other words, it's going to go all over the body. That doesn't mean that everything is going to target itself towards your breathing or your knee joint problems or whatever your specific issue is. And so your body has an innate intelligence to decide. I think actually, as Dr. Carr mentioned on the call, the interview at the beginning, right, your body prioritizes what is important. Now, that's the tricky part, because you might say, well, I want my knees to be better in a week, even though they've been bad for 5 years, right? That's unreasonable expectation of your body, because this is not healing you. It is facilitating your capacity to heal and combat the damage that's going on and that your body's not rectifying. So at the end of the first week, if you are one of the 15% of people who might see something change, but not, and you're the 8, that's great. You can stay at the 4 ounces and you can keep tracking your changes. But if you haven't seen a change, what we suggest is go and double up to the 8 ounces and really kind of fill the glass, which has been diminishing over time. If you can refill that glass quicker for a period of time, you're going to be able to track and see what the body does with that. So keep tracking at the end of the first week, the first month, the second month, the third month. Now, we often talk about doing it for at least 90 days. If I'm working with clients, to me, it's at least 4 to 6 months in whatever I'm doing. And it's not about a year, it's 4 to 6 months, because it takes 4 months for us to turn over the blood once. And then a couple of months to finally start to get on top of things and anchor those changes. Does that mean you won't see something sooner? Absolutely not. About 50% of people are beginning to see the things that they're looking for at the end of the first month, but you might not see what you're looking for. You might see other things. For me, when I started, it was like in the first 2 weeks, definitely more sustained energy, and I'm an Energizer bunny anyway, but it was definitely different, right? Sharper mental acuity, just really being able to pay attention to very, very long hours for concentrating on things. Now, did my main thing that I wanted, which was an injury to my gut from a car accident 10 years earlier that had gone worse and worse and worse over 10 years, did that resolve itself in that first week or first month? No. But at month 3, I started to see changes because I'd had a traumatic brain injury. My brain and gut didn't talk. But at month 3, things started shifting. And then between month 3 and month 9, my body walked its way back through that 10-year injury to finally get my brain and my gut to connect, so that my gut was now capable of doing its job for the first time in 10 years, right? That's profound. And so I would always say to people, be patient and understand that your body is the one that's determining the speed. And there's 2 things that you do have control over. You have control over how much you drink and how quickly you replenish, so that you can really kind of bring more resources, more renovation crew on board so that your body can use it, right? And then the time. And I know so many people who, their journey may be a little slower than somebody else, but it's well worth it. Was it worth it for me to keep working through to finally 9 months? Heck yes, because my 10-year struggle was not a good one. Even as a digestive health specialist, I figured I was going to sort that problem out, no problem whatsoever. But it wasn't that way. And I was taking probably 10 to 12 different supplements a day just to keep things moving. And some of you might be able to say, yeah, that's me. I feel overloaded with things, right? But over time, I gave up all those things and my gut found its way back to normalcy again, right? Remember, it supported me in doing that. So do make sure that you benchmark. Take photos of yourself. I wish we had Rosie here to show, because she's, oh, you do? Okay. Maybe you want to pop that up because I think it's just such a beautiful view of why I say this is the most powerful product I've ever had. And this is Rosie. And if you look at her on the right-hand side there, you can see at 84 that she's incredibly wrinkly, right? You talk, Lynn, about the fact that I always say, right, the wrinkles on the outside are the reflection of the wrinkles on the inside. They are because they are oxidative stress gradually becoming evident, right? Our organs are wrinkling the same way as our skin is. Right, so this is her at 84 on that first bottom right picture. Now we say take the photos because the second picture of her up the screen is 7 weeks later and she didn't think it was doing anything. And yet her son, who was the doctor who had suggested she use it, was able to bring out this picture and say, Mom, look at this. I mean, look at the difference there just in how much less inflammatory responses in that face, how much life is back in those eyes because more energy is in her cells. The third picture is her at 87 and that top picture is her at 91. Guys, there's no physical supplement that comes like this that you can digest that can take somebody another 7 years down the line into their 90s, for heaven's sake, and actually look at least 10 years younger than they did in their 80s. I mean, it just doesn't exist, which is why I say this is so unique. And we have this beautiful package, which is what we call our essentials pack, which is our 6 ounces a day. And so once you kind of find your space, if you're post 50 at least, that's a great quantity to be on. Our science has really strengthened from our clinical studies on 8 ounces. And this is really, a good equivalent to that. So 6 ounces a day, it gives you a free tube of the gel, which is wonderful. And then you also get free shipping. So that's a really nice way to go. Anything else? Should we just move to questions?
We have a lot of questions.
We do. So let's go to questions. Let me just stop the recording and we'll